Hi students, my name is Dr. Lisa Lohmann and I'm really excited to be with you here today. I'm proud of you all for your decision to go into the teaching field, and I thank you for your service that you've shared with our country and state for the years that you've done so. I'm going to zoom out on myself, thank goodness, and share my screen with you and let you watch this, hopefully this video in this way. And hopefully, again, this will be working. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself as we go forward and get into the content of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm here to share with you guys information on instructional design and how do you make lesson plans and unit plans, those kinds of things. So hopefully what I have to share will be helpful. Of course, I'd rather meet with you in person, but we know right now that's kind of risky. So we'll have an opportunity in a final Google Doc for you guys to give me some of your thoughts and for me to give you some feedback. All right, here's a little bit about me. My name is, as I mentioned, Lisa Lohmann. I've been teaching a long time in Oklahoma for 34 years. I have experience in the K through 12 system. I was a language arts instructor, 7th, 9th, 11th, 12th grades. I ran a basic skills lab at the Career Technology Center. I was also the director of teacher education at the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education for 4 years. And I've worked in 2 separate university education programs. I was 6 years at Northwestern Oklahoma State in Alva. And now I'm at UCO, University of Central Oklahoma, where I just recently retired. I was there for 8 years. I have a doctoral degree in curriculum and instruction from OSU. Graduated in 2004, and the reason for my retirement is bullet point number 4. I'm a new grandma to Jimmy. He's 1, and I have twins, Addison and Thomas. They were just born in April. Pretty excited to spend some time with them, hopefully. My presentation today is going to cover 3 different objectives that will hopefully help you better understand the concept of designing instruction for your future students. At the end of each objective and the 3 discussions of the objectives, I'm going to pose a question or questions for thought. You may pause the presentation to answer those questions. However, you don't need to turn them in. Those will not be taken up in any way. At the end of all 3 discussions, I will have a Google form posted. And in this form, you're going to respond to those questions there. And like I said earlier, I'll be able to give you some feedback on your overarching ideas that you're taking away from this presentation. The big question for today: how exactly do educators decide what and how to teach material for their grade level and subject area? I know sometimes it seems like teachers are just magical and they know these things. They know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and that's not always the case. So our objectives will be these 3. I can use goals, standards, and objectives to provide the foundation for instructional lesson and unit plans. I can use the events of instruction to prepare a written plan of instruction. And then finally, I can select design instructional strategies that are appropriate for the selected content, projected learner, and learning environment. Let's get started with objective 1. I can use goals, standards, and objectives to provide the foundations for instructional lesson and unit plans. Okay, what are goals, standards, and objectives? Let's talk about this for a minute. I like to think of goals, standards, and objectives as a funnel, so to speak. So goals are these general expressions of our values that give us a sense of direction, that are be written broadly enough so they're acceptable to large numbers of individuals, such as teachers, school administrators, parents, and U.S. taxpayers. Over the years, obviously, our goals for education have changed. You know, when we first started educating the masses in the United States, it was the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Of course, those things are super important still, but we also have added other things now as the world progresses, as technology and everything progresses. We've changed the direction of some of those overall goals. For example, we've added health and physical education to our general curriculum. We've added things like technology. When some need arises and we as a country decide, hey, this needs to be shared in schools, a lot of times that becomes one of the overarching goals. Standards are basically derived from those goals, and they're ways to specifically identify what must be accomplished and who must do what in order to meet those goals. There are 2 types of standards: professional standards and state standards. We'll talk about both of those in a minute. I also want to point out in the last slide, I had a quotation there as well. I'm getting all this information from a book called, I have it right here beside me, Effective Teaching Methods by Gary Borich. There's a slide at the very end of this that has the bibliographic information if you're interested in looking further into this reference. It's a really, really good resource for creating your own lesson plans. So as I mentioned, there are two types of standards, professional standards and state standards. Professional standards are those that an overall group of people from that representative content area have decided are important. So as I mentioned, I was an English teacher, language arts teacher, and we have a professional group called NCTE, National Council of Teachers of English. And they have some standards that they've written. I know that, and this was a long time ago, I did serve on a standard creating committee here for Oklahoma, and we use those NCTE standards to guide us for writing our Oklahoma state standards. So the professional and state can sometimes go hand in hand. You will come across a couple of fields that don't have state standards, so you will have to go to those professional standards if you happen to fall in a category such as that. Here's where you can find the Oklahoma state standards. OAS is how they're often abbreviated, Oklahoma Academic Skills, and it's at the State Department of Education website. Feel free to go to this website, click on the link, and search for the standards you might find you're most interested in. So some of you might say, I think I'm going to be a 9th grade history teacher. You can go right into 9th grade history and you find out exactly what the state standards are that will be taught that year in 9th grade to our students here in public schools in Oklahoma. Does that make sense? Now, I do want to throw this in because I know some of you may end up in private schools. Private schools often have their own curriculum and their own set of standards. So you will be expected to follow those if you should choose to go to a private school. Another really cool thing about our Oklahoma state standards is that many times in the adopted textbooks that we use here in Oklahoma, those standards are shared in the margins of the text, of the teacher textbook. So you can kind of see, okay, this is the standard I'm covering today. This is what they learned about the standard last year, if appropriate. This is what they'll be learning about the standard next year, if appropriate. So you have some help and some guidance for doing these, for using these standards and giving you a springboard for what you're going to be teaching each day. Now we get to the very bottom of the funnel. This is where we write our objectives. Objectives help move our standards toward exact classroom accomplishments. We're getting very specific now. They're going to express teaching strategies in a format so that we can measure results. We want to know, okay, so what do we do with this overarching standard? We're going to look at, okay, what are we going to do today in class to meet it? This is just a quick little slide that shows that these terms on the right are often used interchangeably: behavioral objective, learning objective, instructional objective, expected outcomes, learning outcomes, achievement goals, performance standard, etc. So the book that I have chosen that I'm using for this, the basis of this presentation, uses the term behavioral objective, but I just wanted you to see that you're probably going to hear these other terms as you move forward, and they basically mean the same thing. We call them behavioral objectives because the learning is a change in behavior that's observable. A behavioral objective must be observable and measurable. So this is where it gets a little tricky. A lot of times we say we want our students to understand something, but how can we tell if a student is understanding something? That's not something we can see them do with our own eyes. So how are we going to address that, and how are we going to find something that we can actually measure? So let's practice real quickly. If I were to give you this objective, students will know the names of states and capitals. The word know there is kind of tricky. How do I know that a student knows something? Maybe better to say the students will label the states and capitals on a provided map. Now I can go in and grade that, I can measure it, and I can observe that they understand and do know what the states and capitals are. The next one, students will explain how the heart works. Okay, that's maybe measurable. I think I would go into a little more detail with that. Explain in 2 paragraphs how the heart works. Or given a chart with the overall functions of the heart, the students will complete the blanks to explain how the heart works. There are a lot of other ways you can do this, but you can make these more measurable. Hopefully that makes sense. The next one, students will understand the value of a work of art. Again, there's that understand. How do I know that they understand it? Again, I would write this like in a short composition or a 1-page composition. Students will express their views on the work of art that we observed in class. The bottom one, of course, is a really good example. Given a TV commercial not seen before, students will identify and describe the propaganda tactic used. This gives us a lot of information. We have the circumstances given a TV commercial not seen before. Here's what I want to observe. Students will identify and describe the propaganda tactic used. So students should be very clear on that objective. So as that last one had all 3 of these things, a good objective will have these 3 things: a condition, an observable learning outcome, and a criterion proficiency level. That's not always going to be the case, that you're going to have a criterion proficiency level, but you might. Like I just mentioned in that last slide, that bottom objective was a good one because it had the conditions and the observable learning outcome. Sometimes we don't need to know the proficiency because it's expected that it's going to be a passing rate. So here's a good example on the right. Given a calculator, students will be able to multiply 2-digit numbers correct to the nearest whole number with 90% accuracy. First of all, let me say real quick, I love that little abbreviation right there. It saves you a lot of writing, but SWABAT, a lot of students will just say SWABAT. They know that this is their expectation for the day. And if you as the teacher can write your objectives using SWABAT, you're going to keep your focus where it needs to be, on the students. What will they be able to do at the end of that lesson or unit? So notice again, this is very direct, this is very observable, and gives them very clear instructions, doesn't it, to the nearest whole number. With 90% accuracy, that might be important for something that you're working on in your classes. Other times, you just the criterion proficiency level may be understood. It's got to be passing. One of my things as a teacher, I love to think that my students are all going to make hundreds. I don't even want to say 90%. I want them to understand it completely. And yeah, I know that's not realistic, but that proficiency level seems to be almost an understood many times. There may be some instances where you need that criterion proficiency level. I think of when I was at the Career Tech, my students had to take a safety class or a course, a mini course, and pass it before they could go out into the auto body shop or into the auto tech shop. They had to pass their OSHA safety test. Of course, you want to have a criterion proficiency level. I think it was 80% or above, because they're now dealing with issues of safety. So sometimes that criterion proficiency level might be really important. Keep in mind, objectives must be student-centered. The students will be able to always focus on the student, not the teacher. They're performance-centered, so they're observable. The student will be able to perform whatever you want them to do about the content you're referring to, and it needs to be specific. Here's another example. The student will be able to diagram and explain the process by which a bill becomes law in the US Congress. Pretty specific, isn't it? In any given day, I would say on a daily lesson plan, you may have anywhere from 2 to 4 objectives that you're going to be covering in one class period. Sometimes it might just be one if you're beginning a new topic and you feel like you're going to have to spend a long time focusing on something. But notice when you go out on the web and look at lesson plans available out there, read those objectives that those teachers have written. Most of the time they have their state standards written there and those objectives that they've derived from those state standards for that daily lesson plan. See how it kind of all fits together. Again, keep it simple, don't be tricky. My other big soapbox, I have many of them because I've taught for a long time, but don't try to trick your students. You're there to teach them, right? Your goal is to let them learn. So we don't ever want to trick our students. Keep that in mind. Make sure it's clear, concise, and very specific. So how do I come up with these great words and verbs for writing my objectives? We're going to look at Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy. For some reason that didn't bold there, but the very bottom level is simply remembering or recalling. Of course, when you're first teaching a new topic, students are going to have to understand it at a very basic level, right? So terms such as define, duplicate, list, label, like we did with the map a minute ago, memorize, recall, repeat, reproduce, state. Those are good verbs that you might want to use simply for that recall, remembering aspect of the topic. Again, we can't use the word understand in an objective, but let's look over here at some of these words. Classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, locate, recognize, select, etc. Notice that Bloom's, they get a little bit more involved as you go up that pyramid. The next is apply, choose, demonstrate, employ, illustrate, interpret, operate, schedule, sketch, solve, use, write, etc. Notice they can't apply what they've learned until they have that very basic level of understanding and remembering. So that's why Bloom's taxonomy is building. Probably you're not going to go to any of those higher level of Bloom's on the first day of instruction. It'll be something late for a project perhaps, or something to culminate the activities with whatever topic you might be teaching. Because then we get up to analyze, evaluate, create. Great verbs here. Save this page, go back to it if you need to. And use these verbs. You can look them up on the web too and find hundreds of great verbs to help you be specific in writing your objectives. All right, here's a stop right here. I want you to think about some objectives you might want for your future content area and grade level. So I'm going to have you pause this presentation right now and look up those Oklahoma academic standards. Follow that link and try to find the field that you're interested in. And then think of what level of objective you will need. Are you introducing a new topic, or are you wanting students to have a more in-depth understanding of a topic with which they're already familiar? Practice writing a few objectives. See if you can write them in that form. The student will be able to, whatever the content is you want them to perform. And if you need to add that criterion, add that as well. Always start with your standards and then build off of them. Many of you may not know what you really exactly specifically want to teach yet. Just choose an area that you might find interesting or you think you might want to teach, and go play around with these state standards a little bit. Very interesting. They're very detailed and will really help guide your instruction for your content area and the grade level you're going to be teaching. Okay, pause right here and go to work. All right, welcome back. The second objective is using the events of instruction to prepare a written plan of instruction. I can use these, okay? I kind of wrote these because I knew you're going to be reading them, but notice I've gotten these in a, hopefully, an objective written form. The student will be able to use the events of instruction to prepare a written plan of instruction. That's what we're going to cover next. Oh, here are just some fun little quotes. Thinking about planning, how important it is to plan. I still have teacher dreams sometimes where I go into a classroom unprepared. Those are awful. And I think that's something a teacher does every year of their life, especially at the beginning of the school. So remember, those who fail to plan to fail. You need to make a good plan. When we're thinking about unit planning and lesson planning, they're two separate things. Unit planning is when we're thinking about an overall topic, maybe the romantic era in language arts. Maybe it's going to be a novel or a play. Maybe in mathematics, it might be slope. So a unit can oftentimes be kind of guided by your textbook. How does your textbook lay out that unit? And that might help you, help guide you. A unit can last anywhere from probably 3 to 4 days to 2 to 3 weeks, depending upon the material you want to cover in a unit. So keep in mind, we're going to go from units now down to the daily lesson plans. But it's important to think about, okay, if I'm going to be teaching the Civil War, that's going to be a pretty good unit, isn't it? A big unit. As a matter of fact, you might even want to break that down to certain battles in the Civil War so that you can get a better grasp on, how complex and how involved that, that topic is. So when we're thinking about unit planning, we're thinking about, okay, what are the standards and objectives I'm going to cover? Who are my learners? If I were with you in class right now, we would talk about the diversity of learners in our classes today. It's just such a huge topic and so interesting. That makes, I think that's what has kept me in education this long, going in every year, every hour as secondary teachers, having students that are so vastly different. It's so much fun. Students who have are from different ethnic backgrounds, students who have different learning abilities, students who don't speak English as their first language, students who differ in socioeconomic status. Think of the diversity. Also even think of the diversity in experiences they have. One of my students who was out in her clinical experience observation this semester told me that one of the students in her class, his dad is a producer in Hollywood. I mean, go figure, lives in Oklahoma, but they fly back and forth to California, at least they used to before the virus, but they fly back and forth to California all the time. He knows famous actors, he's hung out with them. Can you imagine how different that kid's lived experience is going to be compared to a student who, like me, lived in Oklahoma their whole life or whatever. So all learners are so different. And we have to keep that in mind when we're planning for the unit. What if you've had a student whose dad is a Civil War buff and he's gone to all the battle sites and collected memorabilia? And so that student knows a lot about it too. I mean, include some of that student's knowledge in your presentation, or have his dad come speak, or whatever. I'm just thinking here, always try to figure out who your learners are. I recommend highly at the beginning of each year doing some type of getting to know you activity with your students, not just what did I do last summer, but like details. What do you like? What drives you? What interests you? What are your hobbies and pastimes, etc. Find out about your kiddos. The content, of course, we have to know what content we're expected to teach. That's how those state standards are going to help you so much. What methods am I going to use to teach the content now? How can I best get this information to my students? We're going to spend the objective 3 on that very topic. The pedagogical content knowledge goes along with this to some degree, because this is how can I teach this in a pedagogically sound way that will make my students, help my students understand it better. I'm sure all of you can recall a professor that you've perhaps had who you knew their content so well, they were brilliant, but they couldn't get it across to you. They didn't have proper pedagogical knowledge for really teaching the skills. So a good teacher is going to know that for this topic, using a smartboard might be best, or having students collaborate or do a project on this topic is going to help them learn it more deeply. And then number 6, reflective practice and tacit knowledge. After you've presented a unit or a lesson plan, you've got to think about how did this go? Good teachers are reflective. They're constantly, going back, how could I have done better with this lesson? What could I have added to this unit where they would have learned it better? And make sure it's written down and you recall it, because you're going to probably be teaching it again in the future. One thing really great about teaching is that you always get a chance to kind of do over. And I always jokingly say this to my undergrad classes, but I made a lot of mistakes in teaching over the years, but at the end of the day, luckily I've never killed anybody. I know that's terrible to say, but what I've done is I've made some mistakes. I misspelled a spelling word on the chalkboard my first week of teaching. That's going to happen. And it didn't hurt a kid. It didn't hurt me, except embarrassing. It was embarrassing. I corrected it and, say, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm a human too. But we've got to be reflective on our own practice so we can improve as we go forward. So lesson planning, decide where to start. What knowledge level do they have about this topic? Have they learned it in a prior grade? Where are they on Bloom's? Are they still at the very bottom level, just knowledge and understanding? Or are they ready to get into it in a little bit deeper way? We have to provide for our diversity of learners that we might have. What if you have a student who has got a physical disability and needs to hear this lesson? Are we going to have access for that student? That can be a really important question. Of course, what do you want your learners to know or do? How are you going to know that they've learned it? This is going to be a topic you're going to look at deeply tomorrow with Dr. Pennington when you talk about assessment. And then how can you help learners learn it? Again, we're not tricking students. I would love it if every one of my students made hundreds all the time, because I was such a great teacher that they could learn the material 100%. Isn't that right? Isn't that cool? So how can I help them to learn it? What can I do better to get them learning? So here are the 9 events of instruction. This is, like, to me, the backbone of every single lesson plan. You'll go look at a teacher's lesson planning book right now. They're going to have a little tiny bitty square, and they don't have all these 9 events listed out. You're going to go, how did they do that? Well, it's probably that they've been teaching a while. I highly recommend, as you're beginning teaching, to go back through and look at these 9 events. How am I going to make sure that I cover these in every single lesson plan? They're not hard, but it's just an important part of getting through the lesson adequately and making sure your students understand them. The link at the very top, you can go click on that and it will take you right to these 9 events and give you a lot more detail about them than what I'm going to discuss today. But the first one is gaining attention. How am I going to get the students' attention just to be interested for today? Okay, you can ask an interesting question. You can give them a funny cartoon that is about the topic. You can do a quick experiment, bring in a watermelon, have it, put it in water, see if it will sink or float if you're doing a study on mass volume. I gave you a link there to edhelper.com that has a lot of really fun preview activities, like how to create little crossword puzzles or things that just might get the students interested. This should only be 5 minutes at the very most of your class time. You're going to find that one of the things that secondary teachers are limited in is time. When I first started teaching, I had 55 minutes for every one of my classes. I taught 6 classes, actually 5 classes a day, 1 planning period. Before the end of my tenure, this was at Alva High School, I was down to 47 minutes, and we went to a 7 class period a day schedule. That was crazy. I mean, that's only 8 minutes, but in the classroom, that's a lot of time. So make sure you're using your time wisely here. Be really careful. Let's say you're a science teacher and you're going to start a unit on reptiles, and I'm from Northwest Oklahoma, so you bring in 3 rattlesnakes. Do you think you're ever going to get your students' attention again after your attention getter? Probably not. So be really careful about what you do use to gain attention. So have something fun. Inform the learners of the objective. Tell them what they're going to be doing today. Don't you love in college classes, remember having those course syllabi, and you could go through the schedule and kind of check off, this is what I'm going to do. High school kids like this too. What are we going to do today? And what is it, my expectation? So tell them, this is what we're going to do today. I should say objectives if there's more than one, which there might be. So let them know this is what we're going to be able to do. There's a really great website called teachingchannel.com, and you can go, you have to register on it, but it's free. And there's an example there where a teacher is actually having her students every single day repeat her objectives that are on the board. She'll say swabet, and the students will say swabet, and then she'll give the rest of the instruction in the objective. So they're even reciting what those objectives are going to be. So that can be pretty important too. All right, number 3 is how am I going to stimulate recall of prerequisite learning? Okay, it might even be something as quick as remember what we talked about yesterday. Who can remember studying such and such? Just a quick reminder, pull out your homework. Let's look at this. How did we do this yesterday? So just a quick recall of what they know about this topic already. Number 4 is presenting the new content for the day. How are you going to do this? We're going to talk about that in just a moment and some of the many teaching strategies there are. But presenting the content is very key. This is probably going to be the bulk of the time of the class. Number 5, providing learning guidance. If you're finished presenting or in the process of presenting the content, how am I going to see that the students are on task? How am I going, what kind of activities am I going to have them do to guide them along the way? Number 6, elicit desired behavior. Here's where you may ask some questions and help kind of guide them toward, okay, are they understanding what we're going over right now? Number 7, provide feedback. This is probably kind of reflective of number 6, but that may be in a whole group work activity. Number 7, providing feedback is most helpful if it can be individual. So this is where the teacher's walking around the room looking to see, are the students on task? Are they understanding what they're doing, the assignment that I've given them, or working on it in a way that I find satisfactory? Number 8, assessing the learner outcome or the lesson outcome. I always require my students, when I would have them write lesson plans, that number 8 had to always go back to number 2. I wanted to see how my students were ensuring that that day they're making sure their students understand the objectives, or that they have gotten a hold of those objectives that they were supposed to get a hold of that day. Keep in mind, again, Dr. Pennington will talk about this tomorrow, assessment doesn't always mean test or quiz. It can be an exit ticket. It can be, do you understand or do you not understand? It can be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can assess these things in a lot of ways. You're not going to give a daily quiz or a daily test, but some way, every single day, you need to make sure that they're understanding what you presented so far. And then number 9, the last one, is enhancing retention and transferring to the job. What are some things you can further use or provide for the students to help make sure it gets into their long-term memory? We want them to be able to use and apply and analyze and get into those higher order blooms, right? So how am I going to do that next? All right, this is a stop right here. This is where you get a chance to click on a couple of links that I've provided and go look at these lesson plans. If you've not done this yet, go onto Google and just Google lesson plans. You can type English 9th grade or whatever, Romeo and Juliet or whatever. There are millions of lesson plans on the web. And this is something I'm actually quite jealous about, that you guys have access to this when I didn't, when I first started teaching in the 80s. But some of them are good and some of them are really not so good. Make sure that you use this lens of those events of instruction to evaluate if a lesson plan is good or not. Is it okay to use them? Of course. One of my methods teachers that I had, again, back in the 80s, always would say, you're a teacher, you're going to beg, borrow, steal, stealing meaning, legally stealing. But look here, I mean, you guys have this information at your fingertips. If you find a great lesson plan, of course, take it, modify it. It's not going to work 100% for your group of students in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, or wherever you may be. So you're going to have to modify it, massage it, but find them. There's some amazing ones. Oh my gosh, just on the tip of my tongue, we've got, Teachers Pay Teachers. That is a great website that you don't have to pay to join. I think if you want some of the premium services, it costs a little bit, but it's very, very low cost. The Smithsonian has countless lesson plans. The K-20 Center in Norman, Oklahoma is this archive full of wonderful lesson plans that are tried and true. So go out there and search and find lesson plans. Okay, using the two here that I've just provided for you, I want you to stop and critique them. Go through that list of 9 events. Are they there? Or do you see something missing? What is this lesson lacking? And then ask yourself, how could I modify this lesson plan maybe for older students, younger students, those with less or more prior knowledge, maybe those on IEPs, those students who are gifted. Think about how you could change this lesson plan to fit other people's provisions. And then you can also think about how could I integrate this with other disciplines? That's something I always wanted to do as a junior English teacher. I always wanted to work with my 11th grade American history teacher because American literature and American history are so tightly knit. Never got to do it, but it sure been fun. So take a few minutes, play around, Google lesson plans. Go check out these 2 I've provided and start critiquing them. How can I improve this? Or is it good as it is? Most teachers love sharing their lesson plans because they know how hard it is to be a teacher, and they like knowing that they can help out their fellow colleagues. All right, take a pause. Welcome back. This is our final objective. This is going to be a little more quick because, again, this is something that's very personal, I think, but this is selecting and designing instructional strategies that are appropriate for the content, the learner, and the learning environment. In other words, how do I decide to teach this? Those of you who are just coming, from college fairly recently, you're going to remember that a lot of your college courses are a lot of lecture, And, for a college student, that can work. But that may not be so appropriate or effective for these younger students that you're going to be working with. So how can you improve on your instruction? Some things you have to think about as you go forward. What's some pacing or tempo? How are you going to know how quickly to introduce new material and to dwell on it? I mean, a lot of this is going to be that, maybe that quick assessment. Are you getting it or are you not? Do I need to slow down? One of my sons had a teacher in high school whose goal was to get through the book. It was a mathematics. And I can't remember if it was maybe algebra or trig, I can't remember. But to me, that seemed like a really, I know it probably follows the state standards, but if you miss something in math back here, and the way math builds on itself up here, if you just keep forging ahead, you're leaving kids behind. So be very careful about the pace and tempo of your presentation. What is my mode of presentation going to be? Direct presentation, such as PowerPoints, lecture. You remember, you guys, when PowerPoints were first a thing, and every presentation you'd go to, they read the PowerPoint to you. That was terrible. So luckily, we've come a long ways from there. We have a lot of other things that we can use. But keep in mind, if you didn't like learning that way, your students probably don't either. Group discussions can be very beneficial, but I think they need to be guided, especially in high school, middle school. Those kids are going to need some direction about what to talk about, because if you just let them talk, they're not going to be talking about what you want them to, I promise. Or could it be web-based instruction? You might have them on the internet doing some research. Will the students be working in small groups? Am I going to be teaching to the full class, or are they going to be doing independent work? And then what's my method for calling on kids? What's my classroom management going to be? Will the students raise their hands? Will they speak out? Just yell out the answers? Be consistent on this one, because if you just allow them to scream out the answer sometime and then the next day you expect them to raise their hands, it's kind of like training dogs. It's going to be harder to get them to do it. So let them know your expectations right off the bat and stick to it. There are so many teaching strategies. As I mentioned before, there are so many available to you guys. Most of you are familiar with the lecture direct instruction, but there are other types. Indirect instruction, where the kids are able to maybe do some learning on their own. Self-directed constructivist learning, where students kind of create their own meaning out of information you provide. Cooperative learning, collaboration. A lot of ways where students, they love to learn together. I just think it's such a powerful thing right now. We have Google Docs where they can share ideas, they can work on things collaboratively. And I learned so much from my colleagues and from others. We can't sell that short in the classroom. Of course, it does need to be guided. Cooperative learning is one of the things I struggled with as a teacher. How could I get my students to work in small groups and all of them do their share of the work? But there's some really good resources for that. Again, Google cooperative learning strategies and find out how can I give each student in each group a task, and how am I going to have each student in that group rate other members of that group. That's really going to help with that responsibility sharing, and also with the work the students will do. It will help a little bit. Please know that these strategies aren't used typically exclusively in each classroom. Teachers will mix them up. Sometimes there may have to be a little bit of direct instruction to go over new material, but then the teacher breaks the students into groups, or lets them go back to learning centers, or has them come up to the computer, to the smart board. So that's what's fun about teaching strategies, is you get to pick the ways that are helpful. I know that math teachers now are using a lot of manipulatives. They're using a lot of hands-on activities for teaching their kids, and the kids are getting it better than they used to. So much easier to mess with something and learn it if you can be hands-on, right? Other strategies can be mixed in as well. Go search teaching strategies. It's going to reveal countless ideas for mixing up teaching, thus making learning a lot more interesting. So this is our final pause before your Google Doc. I want you to think about what you might use that would be appropriate for your content area and chosen grade level. You know, if you're going to be teaching seniors, they're going to be a little bit different learners than 7th graders. Not a little bit different, vastly different, because I've taught both of those grade levels in the same semester, by the way. And they respond differently to different types of strategies. So go do a quick internet search, just look up teaching strategies, and think about at least 3 strategies that you think you would like to dive into a little more deeply and use in your own classroom. And then come back. All right, welcome back to your final slide. This is just your Google form to complete. This is going to be just reflective questions. It's not going to have anything that I'm going to be necessarily grading for right or wrong, but I want you to respond to these questions, and I will respond to your responses as well. I hope you found this somewhat helpful. Again, if we were there in person, I could answer questions as they were occurring to you, but on the final question that I've posed on this Google form, feel free to ask me any questions that you have over this presentation or this topic that you would like me to answer, and I would definitely take the time to do that. Thanks for your time, you guys. I hope that you enjoy your week and that these sessions are helpful for you. Here's the reference, unless I've otherwise indicated it, and that will help you out a little bit if you want to go look up this source. Thanks again. Best of luck.